Hey everybody, welcome back to True Crime with Andy Hale. I've been talking with David Rose, and I hope you heard our prior episode where we just started to talk about the stocking stranglings in Columbus, Georgia that happened in 1977 and 1978. I got goosebumps telling this. I never heard about this case. And where we left off was there was a guy named Carlton Gary that gets arrested for charged, I guess, with three of the murders based on his fingerprints matching fingerprints found at three of these crime scenes. Okay, so I want to pick it up at that point. Carlton, and this is 1984, to be clear, 6 years have passed. The case has gone cold. The killings have stopped, which is kind of weird, even though Carlton Gary, as you said last episode, continued to live in Columbus, Georgia, for a year at least after the murder stopped in April of 1978. So that's kind of a weird red flag that if it was really Carlton Gary, he just decided to turn off the serial killer gene like it's a light switch, which, I think I'll stop doing those. So now let's pick it up. He gets arrested and they announce that there's a fingerprint match. So now what happens?
Well, it's an extraordinary thing. This fingerprint match, it's crazy because, there had been no match when they actually had taken Carlton's prints 5 years earlier in 1979. And not only that, there were no photographs of these prints that were, when they were actually taken from the victims' homes. And meanwhile, they arrested Carlton Gary shortly before they arrested him for the stranglings, for smoking marijuana, and then not charged him and let him go. But of course, he'd given loads of samples, or he'd left his fingerprints on many items in the county jail. So my belief is that they just faked these fingerprint cards. They had no photographs of the fingerprints, but they just faked these cards. They took items which he had touched, for example, a glass of water. I'm holding a glass of water now. My fingerprints are on that glass. You put tape on that, and then you stick it on a card. Well, did you find that print at a crime victim's home? If you can't prove with a photo where you took that print from, it's very easy to fake.
Let's take it chronologically because I want to continue to plot along. He gets arrested.
Yeah.
Now, is there further evidence before he goes to trial? So what year does he have his criminal trial?
Well, he has his trial in 1986, in August 1986, so more than 2 years go by. But there's another crucial piece of evidence that they put into the mix.
Okay, I want to hear about what happens between the time of his arrest and the time of the trial. So they arrest him claiming there's a fingerprint match.
Yeah.
Okay. And then before trial, is there any other evidence developed allegedly that linked him to the crime?
He was basically convicted on the basis of two things: the fingerprints, and as you say, they were at three of the crime scenes, but the state claimed that, although they didn't charge him with the other four murders plus the further rape, they said that the same man had done all these, so they called these uncharged crimes that he was also guilty of. So that's that. They charge him with the cases where they're prints, but then something else happens. After they arrest him, the police, led by Detective Michael Sellers, spend a long time, hours and hours, I think a day and a night at least, maybe 2 nights, interrogating him. They don't just spend time questioning him at the police department. They drive around Winton, the upscale neighborhood where the murders took place, taking him to the scenes of these murders. And they say that he basically confessed. They say that he gave a full account. And, this phrase you often hear in these circumstances.
You can't see the smirk on my face that you can see if you're watching this on YouTube, but go ahead.
Well, they say he revealed details, in inverted commas, that only the killer could have known.
Yeah.
There's just one little problem with this confession. The little problem is this. The police admit that all the way through, when they were talking to him in the police department, and when they had him in a patrol car going around these crime scenes, they had a tape recorder, but they never used it. They never switched it on because they said, Carlton said it made him feel uncomfortable. So they said, okay, so you're a suspected serial killer, but we care that you feel uncomfortable. We won't switch it on. Yeah. They don't take any notes. What actually happened?
No notes either?
No notes. What actually happened is 2 months after they had arrested Carlton, by which time he'd already been charged with the murders, 3 cops sit together in the canteen in the police department, and they basically work up a lengthy document that they say they can recall perfectly from their memory of when they were interrogating him, and they set down all these things he is
3
supposed to
months
have
later,
said. 2 months later.
they're documenting from alleged memory their
Yep.
conversations with Carlton.
Yep. And this is 2 months after the conversations. They say that he waived his Miranda rights. He says he never had them read to him. And they just produced this unsigned document as the confession.
And it's their version of what he said, confessing to some of the murders.
Yes, I think it was quite a few of them, but yes.
Let me pause you again. I have so many. It's actually better that I don't know much about this case because I'm literally have this youthful exuberance about all the questions I have, and I just want to go back for a minute, the detective in me, because I keep thinking about what struck me was the way you set this up was this is a wealthier part of town.
Mm-hmm.
It is a richer part of town. It is a whiter part of town, and these are older women, and these are primarily houses. Is that correct?
Yes, I think nearly all, possibly all.
Was there evidence in these, and you may or may not know this, but was there evidence in these cases of forced entry?
Yes, there was.
So somebody would break in.
Yes.
Was that consistent in terms of the method?
No, it was. I mean, whoever it was an opportunist. I mean, sometimes doors were just not locked. The most interesting case was there was one house where the killer climbed onto an air conditioning unit on the wall outside the kitchen, and then climbed through the window into the house. Now that's significant because he left footprints that were. He had dusty sneakers, and he left footprints in the house, and he left footprints when he left the house.
What were the size of the footprints?
Well, that's very interesting. Again, this is something that did not emerge at the trial, but I tracked down the Georgia Bureau of Investigation agent who found these footprints and took photos of them and measured them. They were size 9 footprints.
Okay.
Carlton Gary had size 14 feet, very unusually large feet.
Okay, so oh my God, let's pause there. That's just enormous exculpatory evidence. The fact that the foot, I mean, it's not even close. It's not like 9 or 10, and you can say it's close. Size 9 and size 14. 14 is huge.
I know.
So what strikes me here is that evidence existed right then that was available that his lawyers, unfortunately, didn't see or miss. Yep. I mean, oh my God, I feel so bad that was there. And that's why what I preach in all the cases I get involved in, the devil's always in the details. You got to know every single document, every single piece of information. And you got to go back and read it multiple times, because the first time you read that report that says it's size 9 prints of footprints of, you might not know your client has size 14.
No.
No, but you got to go back like that. You're looking at anything forensically that can't be matched. All right, so that just, oh my God, that blows my mind. The reason I had asked this question about the forced entry was I just wanted to see if there might be the possibility that this person could have known some of the victims casually somehow. So I think that kind of eliminates it, maybe.
Well, you know what? I mean, I don't want to get too far down this road because I think it may just be a red herring. But a lot of people in Columbus believe that the true killer was white, but also somebody who was widely known, and who eventually ended up in a kind of secure mental institution, someone who had very severe mental health issues. And he certainly...
When did they go to the mental institution? In April of 1978?
And that's an interesting point. I can't honestly remember. I think it was a bit later. I mean, I've never seen any positive evidence that connects him with this, save for one thing. Okay, so here's another piece of physical evidence. I managed to find somebody who, again, had done kind of forensic science testing stuff associated with the case. And he had done some examinations of pubic hairs found at the crime scene. But these ones were not the black curly pubic hairs that had led the coroner to claim that the killer was an African American. They were red. Now,
Wait.
this individual did have red hair. This
Wow.
guy, this scientist, was never called to testify. The jury never heard about him finding red pubic hairs.
Well, let's pause there.
Somebody
So does
found
this mean we've got two different killers?
I don't think so. I think
Getting with two different color pubic hair?
no. I think the coroner was just. I mean, the coroner was frankly a whack job. He was eventually fired for treating dead bodies with, shall we say, the most extreme form of disrespect you can imagine.
You think that his characterization of it being black curly was actually incorrect, that it was more reddish?
I think that's the likelihood. I think that's the great likelihood. Yes.
Oh my God. So this could be like a 10-hour podcast. So, I have so many questions. We're in episode number 2. I can already tell there might be an episode number 3. What I want to focus on this one is, episode 1 was talking about the background, the murders leading up to the eventual arrest of Carlton Gary. What I want to talk about now in this episode 2 is what happened between the time of the arrest and the trial, and then what happened at the criminal trial. And I think we'll actually do an episode 3, which is what all your work post trial.
Okay.
So let's kind of continue. He's arrested. They say it's a fingerprint match. That's their claim. Then there's this, sounds like ridiculous, bogus confession based on memory that they don't document until several months later. They don't have any notes. They didn't audio tape it. Is there anything else law enforcement? And this is the Columbus Police Department?
Yeah.
And so do they go to trial? Do they have anything else in their toolbox?
They have one other absolutely sensational killer, apparently, piece of evidence. So you have 7 murders and rapes, but they're preceded just by a matter of a few days, maybe a week, by one earlier rape, undoubtedly committed by the same guy, because the same self-tightening knot is used by this rapist.
It's a unique knot.
Yeah, it's a kind of weird self-tightening knot where you kind of pull on it and it just tightens around the throat. So it's apparently something that people are taught in the military, which is why I've always thought that it may be that the real killer was in the army. But anyway, this woman who had been raped in her home in this same area and then strangled, and the killer left her for dead, but she survived. She told the Columbus police that she was certain that Carlton Gary was the man who had raped her.
Okay, well, this is a problem for Carlton Gary.
Well, it would have been a problem. It should have been an insuperable problem. But here's the thing.
Let me pause there. So she tells this to the police after Carlton Gary gets arrested?
She actually tells the police a year after he was arrested, which is curious. By that time, his face had been appearing frequently on television because, of course, there was huge interest in the case and the pre-trial stages. So when his face, as I say, has been widely broadcast, she sort of approaches the police and then she makes a detailed statement.
Does she go to the police or do the police go to her? That's important.
I honestly can't remember that detail.
I give it a little more credibility if she reaches out and says, "Hey, I got something to share," as opposed to they go back to her and try to, maybe they got an agenda. Do you know how that went down or no?
I can't truthfully recall, but actually it's not that important, and I'll explain why. So when Carlton had already been convicted and he came up for his state habeas appeal, his then attorney, Jeff Ertl, was given finally access to the complete district attorney's file. And in that file, he found 2 amazing things. The first was the initial detailed statement by this victim of rape, Gertrude Miller, in the hours after she had been found and left, after being left for dead. And what she told the police at that time was that the rapist did not turn on the light and that it was so dark in her bedroom that she couldn't even say if he had been black or white, let alone
What?
recognize him. Yeah.
What?
But there's something else.
This is in the file?
This is in the file.
I mean, this is in the file. I'm sorry, but would Carlton Gary's defense lawyer have had access to that?
No, it was the clearest possible Brady violation. That is a violation of the rules set out in Brady versus Maryland about the obligation on the prosecution.
Yeah, you got to share exculpatory information. It wasn't shared.
Exactly.
How did it get discovered later?
Well, basically what happened was that Georgia had passed a statute called the Open Records Act. And I think this was sometime after Carlton Gary's trial. And basically, his then defense attorneys were able to use this law to get access to the full DA file.
Oh my God.
But there's more. So her first statement to the court.
Hold on. Does Gertrude Miller testify at the criminal trial?
Oh, yes.
So she identifies him as having been the guy that raped her.
This is the moment when the trial turned. This is when what looked like a maybe case became a certainty.
Yeah, I mean, this is just being real. If you've got a witness in court who says somebody raped me, and obviously you're face to face, you have, in identification cases, there's always, the main question is, what is your opportunity to observe? So if somebody says, I was a block away, or it lasted somebody grabbed my purse and ran, it's a very fleeting moment. But here in a rape where you are focused on the person's face, that evidence is checkmate. You are not going to walk away on that case. Even if the lady's wrong, if the lady identifies you in court and says it's you, I'm sorry, my friend, but you're going to get found guilty, and that's the end of the story. Turn the lights out, goodbye, the fat lady's singing. There's nothing you can do, unfortunately.
That is absolutely right. And what actually happened here was, in his closing summation, the district attorney, Bill Smith, he said, members of the jury, some people might say a long time has passed. By this time, it's 1986. We're talking about a crime that happened 9 years earlier in 1977. He said, don't ask how she can possibly remember this face. He said, you must ask, how could she possibly forget? He said, I'm quoting almost verbatim, don't you know that every night she sees that face in front of her when her head touches the pillow? And, it's burned into her memory. She can never forget it. Now, there is one other thing you need to know. Not only had she made a statement on the day or the following day after her attack that she couldn't say who had attacked her because it had been so dark, didn't even know if the rapist was black or white. You remember I mentioned this man, Jerome Livers, who was the fall guy with a low IQ who confessed not only to the first two Columbus stocking stranglings, but also to the kidnap of Charles Limber's baby and so on, and murdering President McKinley. Well, when the police had him in custody, charged with the first two stocking stranglings, guess what? Gertrude Miller made a statement saying that Jerome Livers was the man who had attacked her.
Oh my God.
And that too was in the DA's file.
God, if you and I were sitting here and we're going to write, we said, hey, let's do a screenplay. I want to do something. We'll base it in Georgia, like a place with a really racist history. Let's put it in Columbus. Okay. And you just said to me what you just said about Gertrude Miller. I probably would say, you know what? It's too over the top, David. No one's going to believe that. I know it's just television. I know it's just drama. I know it's just scripted, but it's a little much. Oh my God. That blows me away. Now, let me ask you this. You probably don't know the answer to this. I wonder if the prosecutors of Carlton Gary had access to those documents.
Well, they were in their files.
That was the prosecution's file?
That was in the prosecution file.
Oh, that's the prosecution file. I thought this was maybe some other kind of file.
No, it was the district attorney's file.
Oh my God. So how can that be? How can you go forward in a case, in a capital case with that in your file? That is one of the most outrageous things I have heard in my 35 years practicing law. And I've seen and heard quite a bit. And that's that's maybe number one. I got to
Yeah.
say that absolutely stuns me that she says two things, that the other guy she identifies at one point, and then it was so dark she couldn't tell if he was black or white.
Mm.
And they get her to testify that she knows for sure 9 years later it's Carlton Gary.
Yeah.
Oh my God. So let me ask you another question about the trial. So it sounds like Gertrude Miller is the star witness. She's going to be the star witness. You've got this distinctive knot in her case, the distinctive knots used in the other cases. Do they present fingerprint evidence that they claim match? So they're presenting alleged fingerprints found in the crime scenes that are Carlton's?
Yes, but not from Gertrude Miller's house.
Right, but in the other cases,
in 3 of the other cases, they do.
they're relying on fingerprints that, as you already noted, were not basically processed in the way you would expect in terms of documenting, taking photos and whatnot. The way it was done, what you're saying is it could have easily, it left room for error and fabrication because of the way it was done.
Yeah.
Okay. And does Carlton Gary testify in his own defense?
No, he doesn't.
And the defense put on any kind of a case, or is it more just cross-examining the state's witness?
Basically, they relied on cross-examination. Now, there is a very important point to note here. The defense basically had one hand tied behind its back for the entire process. Now, the reason for that was obviously this is a big, complicated case. And it involved numerous different crimes. And although, they were focusing on 3, they were clearly hearing testimony on the other 4 murders, plus the rape of Gertrude Miller. The court, in the shape of the judge who was hearing the case, Judge John Land, he appointed as an attorney to represent Carlton, a local guy who basically had no death penalty experience. So Carlton didn't have confidence in this guy. I later got to know him, and actually he became a friend. He sadly passed away a few years ago, but I actually think he was a pretty decent guy. But, he didn't have the experience that Carlton was looking for. So Carlton wanted to assign an attorney from Atlanta called Bud Seaman, who was an experienced death penalty attorney and very committed. And, he was a remarkable guy. I mean, he was a kind of decorated Vietnam Special Forces veteran, for example. He was a brave, committed individual. So Carlton asked to have Bud Seaman represent him. So Judge Land said, fine, you can do that, but I just make one stipulation. If you change your representation, Bud Seaman will have to do this entire huge case pro bono. And not only will he not get paid for representing you, we will not authorize any expenses in terms of traveling to prove witnesses, in terms of commissioning alternative forensic science tests, nothing. You will not get a cent of public funding.
Wow.
And Bud Seaman accepted this. And I mean, maybe that was a grave error of judgment, because the fact is, it meant that he was literally being driven bankrupt by the pressure of trying to do this case without any funding. But of course, it also meant, he just couldn't really do the job in the way that he would otherwise have expected.
I'll give you a good example in my Chester Uyghur case, okay, that we've talked about. So for people that don't know, I think most people listening to my podcast do know, Chester Uyghur was convicted in 1961 of one of 3. There was a triple murder. They only charged him with 1 because they didn't want to. If he got acquitted, they wanted to be able to try him with another one or 2 of them. Anyway, he gets convicted of a triple murder in 1961. I've been representing him pro bono for 7 years, going on 8. I had to hire Bodhi Technology to do DNA testing. I had to hire Othram to do genetic genealogy. I had to hire Brian Cutler to be a false confessions expert. I had to hire David Fowler to be a forensic pathologist. I had to hire Skip Palnick in his lab, Microtrace, to assess the evidence. I mean, the amount of time and resources, and I'm still fighting. Yeah. I'm still fighting, and I've made tremendous progress, and the Will County State's Attorney's Office is still maintaining the confession is legitimate. My point of all this is, it takes an enormous amount of time and effort to prove your innocence.
Yeah.
And what's sad and really breaks my heart is that there could be somebody innocent out there like Carlton Gary. And what you need is a person who has the time and money to do all this. And now, and his case is different. It's a criminal trial. So, the clock's ticking. And I don't think people realize how damn hard it is to unwind once you've been convicted. It is so hard to do and to unwind it. So it's just so tragic to hear that his lawyer was hampered in that fashion, because in a case like that, the only way you're going to win is really a forensic component. You got Gertrude Miller saying it was your client. You're gonna need a forensic component, and you're kind of screwed when they're not turning over documents that were exculpatory. And so this guy takes on the case. He's got one arm tied behind his back. They have a trial, and what happens?
Well, the trial was in some ways surprisingly short, given, we're talking about a lot of different crimes here, but it lasted for less than 3 weeks. And at the end of it, the jury found him guilty. And they then, of course, had the penalty phase, as happens in death penalty cases, and they sentenced him to death. And so that was in August 86. They sentenced him.
So these prosecutors knew from their file that there were footprints in one of the murders where it was a size 9 shoe, and Carlton Gary was size 14.
Yep.
They also knew Gertrude Miller had said contemporaneously it was so dark she didn't know if the person was black or white. Yep. She also pinned it on this other guy. What was his name originally?
Jerome Livers.
And you're going to go to trial in a capital case? I mean, let's pause there. I really don't understand that. Being a trial lawyer myself, I understand the competitive nature of trials and wanting to win and being a zealous advocate. And I get that. And but what I don't understand is how somebody could intentionally bury exculpatory evidence that literally makes the case go away. In my opinion, if you walked into court, if I was Carlton's defense attorney and I had those pieces of evidence, that there's just no way the case can go forward. How do you explain that? Do you know any background of the prosecutors?
Yes, I'll tell you exactly how I explain it. I think it can be explained by the history of the South in general and of Columbus, Georgia in particular. Now, you may have wondered why my book is called the Big Eddie Club.
I did wonder that.
Okay, so the Big Eddie Club is a real place. It is a real club. And,
just got it. I'm gonna read it. Go ahead.
Thank you.
It's a real club?
The Big Eddie Club. It's a upscale private dining club and bar, and it's situated in a beautiful location on the Chattahoochee River above what was known as the Big Eddy. It's an eddy in the river where apparently it was a great place to catch catfish. Now, this club attracted much of Columbus's all-white elite. Until very recently, until I was well on him, not long before I published the book, it was entirely white. There were no African American or other people of color who were members of the Big Eddie Club. But 5 of the victims' families in the Stocking Stranglings were members of the Big Eddie Club, as were most of the senior officials involved, including the district attorney, in the case. And I think what you see there is the kind of...
the district attorney was part of the Big Eddie Club too?
Oh, yes. Absolutely.
Okay.
And I think what you saw there was a manifestation of this kind of hierarchy in a very old-fashioned southern city with a long and ignoble racist tradition. So here you have this club, which kind of is where these social bonds are forged. And, I think you could say that these people just thought, well, we have to clear these crimes. They've been this great wound inflicted on the society of this city. And if it means turning a blind eye to exculpatory evidence, well, so be it. I think that's the only way you can explain it.
This to me is more egregious because I I understand. I don't. It's wrong, and I don't condone it. I understand cases, and this happened in the Starved Rock murders case in 1960. You've got these three wealthy women brutally murdered in this beautiful state park. Nobody's going to the state park. Everybody's freaked out. It's a national news story. We got to catch this this mass murderer, and there's pressure to solve it.
Yeah.
In what you're talking about here, Carlton Gary doesn't get arrested for 6 years. The murders have stopped.
Yep.
There's no more panic in the upscale neighborhood about someone's going to break in, rape me, and strangle me. So you don't even have the component of this hot case that we got to solve. It's pressure. What you've got is, at best, we've got a black guy that we know couldn't have done it from this evidence, from the foot, the shoe size, and Gertrude Miller. But yet we don't care because maybe in our own minds we're getting justice of some sort. I just think it's so egregious beyond my comprehension.
Again, I think you have to look at the history, which I did research in a lot of depth. So I mean, I mentioned that the judge who made this decision to allow Carlton to change his lawyer, Judge Land, said you don't get any money for this case, which effectively made the defense impossible. But Judge Land was a very interesting guy. So his father, a man called Aaron Brewster Land, is documented as the leader of not one but 2 lynch mobs in Columbus in the early part of the 20th century.
Wow.
John Land himself covered up the murder of the main civil rights leader, black civil rights leader in Columbus, Georgia, Dr. Thomas H. Brewer, who was shot in broad daylight in front of numerous witnesses. And he basically rigged the grand jury before he became a judge, when he was the district attorney. He rigged a grand jury, or persuaded a grand jury not to charge the guy who shot the black civil rights leader with murder and just turn him loose, on the crazy basis that Thomas H. Brewer was going to shoot this guy himself. I mean, he was a respected physician. He was the most significant doctor in the black community. And the idea that he would just go and shoot someone in a department store where this happened, I mean, it was crazy.
Are any of these people still alive?
No. No, Land died some time ago. Interestingly enough, when I was researching the book, I interviewed John Land. I got to know him.
Oh, you did?
I did. In fact, I met him 3 times. And to my absolute amazement, he expressed sorrow at the decision he had made in both the Thomas H. Brewer case and in Carlton Gary's case. And he kind of apologized.
Or his decision,
and he said he had come to realize he had done the wrong thing.
Do you think he felt Carlton was innocent?
Yes, he actually told me that. He said exactly that.
And when you talked to him, was he near the end of his life?
Yeah, he was. I think he was then about 85. Yeah, I mean, and this was 15 years ago. So I'm sure I've read an obituary, but he'd be over 100 now. But
Do you have any of that on tape? Is it recorded?
It was taped. I probably still do have the tape somewhere. I mean, there'll be old-fashioned little micro cassette recordings, but I think I probably do.
Well, I want to do this. This is unusual. I've never done this before because this conversation is so engaging and it's so powerful. I want to have you back for an episode 3. So
Okay.
I want to end this episode 2 with, we've had a trial. Basically, Gertrude Miller testified, identified Carlton Gary as the person who raped her. You've got the alleged fingerprints that the state produced, the prosecutors for the 3 other cases. The jury convicts them. There's a penalty phase. They give him the death penalty. We're going to leave it there. Everybody listening, you got to come back for episode 3, because this is when it's going to really, you think it's been crazy so far. We are just warming up. We haven't even gotten into the good stuff. So we need to come back. We're going to do episode 3 about what happens after the trial. To be continued. I can't wait to get you back on here. Thanks for being here.